Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Crystal, and I'm the marketing manager here at iTracks, and I am really looking forward to introducing you to today's guest speaker. But before I do that, I do have a few housekeeping items. So first, we will be sending out the recording for this webinar to everyone who registered. So keep an eye out for that either later this afternoon or tomorrow. Second, please feel free to ask questions. There is a Q&A section here in Zoom. So please submit any questions that you might have for Professor Fisher or for myself or someone else from iTracks into that Q&A panel, and I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. So if you have anything that you want to ask or say, or you want to greet your fellow attendees or anything at all, we're looking forward to some conversation today. So please feel free to submit that either in the question panel or in the chat. So with those items out of the way, I am very pleased to be able to introduce you to today's guest speaker, who is Professor Lawrence Fisher of Roosevelt University in Chicago. Professor Fisher started his career in cultural anthropology, during which he wrote a book called Colonial Madness: Mental Health in the Barbadian Social Order, based on 3 years of immersive ethnographic fieldwork. His background in research led him to the field of marketing, for which he completed his postdoc at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And he now has 26 years of applied marketing research, having held titles such as Senior Vice President in charge of online strategy. He's worked for 5 of the top 10 market research companies in the world. And he now works as the associate professor, or as an associate professor at Roosevelt University, part of the Heather College of Business. And I can honestly tell you, based on personal experience, that he is one of the most interesting people I've had the pleasure of speaking to in my role here at iTracks. And he is very well loved, both as a collaborator and conversation partner by my colleagues here at iTracks as well. So I am very, very pleased to now be able to hand the reins over to our guest speaker, Professor Lawrence Fisher.
Thank you, Crystal. I appreciate the warm welcome and hope I live up to it. Crystal really did cover my background, and I don't recommend that for my students to do as much jumping around as I did. But I was eager to try new things, and maybe I've got yet another career ahead of me. I did come up through research, but it wasn't marketing research. My initial experience was in ethnography. I ran the ethnographic field school for Northwestern University out of the Southwest, New Mexico to be specific. And students would come, undergraduates and graduates, and would totally immerse themselves in some aspect of typically Navajo, but we also work with Hickory, Apache, Jemez Pueblo, Hispanic, so on and so forth. And they had exciting summers indeed. But my training was in total immersion, basically, and doing research in a naturalistic setting. And that put me in a way against focus groups because there was something artificial about that. But I've come to realize that we had a lot of freedom as social anthropologists, cultural anthropologists. We could create our own definitions, and we didn't have any sort of a client or someone who could tell us what was important and what wasn't. And that wasn't, that wasn't all good. I didn't realize how spoiled I was for doing research in the West Indies for 3 years, working at a mental hospital without anybody telling me, no, I needed to do this or do that, or they needed to make a business decision in a matter of days, so speed things up. So there's something accelerated that I was unaware of before I went into the field of marketing research. Crystal, next slide, please. There we are. What I'm about to share with you this afternoon, for most of you, I guess it's afternoon, is the history. And what I'm going to be telling you is nothing new. this actually goes back to Robert Merton, sociologist and chairman of the Department of Sociology at Columbia University in New York. And he's the one that came up with a two-tiered approach, starting with a focused interview, and that's his spelling, not mine, with the two S's. Years later, editors would change it down to one S, but he never used the term focus group. And because the focused interview was a precursor to the online, I'm sorry, to the quantitative survey that was going to follow. And this was done during the war years in the 1940s, 43, 44, 45, getting a public sentiment in the US behind the war effort in World War II in the various theaters. So he really basically saw this as a starting point for doing what he called polling research. But this is basically, if I can just read it, that the goal of the moderator is non-direction, which means that's his term, giving the opportunity to express himself. It's this is also dated in terms of the 40s. We would say themselves about matters of central significance to him or to them, rather than those presumed to be important by the interviewer. That is, in contrast to the polling approach, it uncovers what is on the subject's mind rather than what is on the interviewer's mind. And so basically, what he's saying is he really wants to give what he calls flexibility in the ability to get interesting and relevant information, but not be imposing as a moderator on what they have to say. The resulting Qual material did much to help shape the interpretation of the quantitative data. And that's a key finding here, and that's something that I strongly recommend, that if you are doing non-standalone qualitative research, namely a focus group, you're going to be doing it not so much as to reach closure at that time, though standalone and a series of qualitative studies, focus groups in San Diego, Chicago, New York, Miami, you name it, can be merged together to get sort of a more national representation. But if you don't know to ask the quantitative question, you're not going to be able to see if it has legs. And that was what Merton and his team were doing 70 years ago. And the other thing in terms of marketing research, which is my field, is that if you're making a business decision, it's dangerous to accept the ideas emerging from a focus group without corroboration from larger scale survey research. And this is something that Leo Bogart wrote about in Strategy and Advertising as recently as the 80s. I happened to meet Merton in the late 80s, 86, 87. He was invited to a New York chapter meeting of the American Marketing Association, and he was shocked to see that focus groups were existing as a standalone technique. And that somehow the focused interview had been separated from the quantitative polling or survey, we would call it now, that was to follow. He kept those findings to himself. He didn't tell the US government what he was finding at the level of the focused interview, but waited until he could confirm it as a social scientist would want to do. Next slide, please. Let's look at some definitions, and you'll see some of the tension in contemporary research that these indicate. quantitative research in the textbook I'm using now to teach undergraduates and graduates at Roosevelt in marketing research and marketing decision making. It's research that uses mathematical analysis. Nothing wrong with that definition, but in McDaniel and Gates, which is the leading textbook now for marketing research, their definition of qual is research whose findings are not subject to quantification or quantitative analysis. And I have a problem with that definition. The problem being that it's defining the qualitative research in terms of what it is not. And really, to find out what it is, I'm looking at Aspers and Quart and other people that have tried to define it in better fashion. Its trademark is being close to the research topic, tending to engagement and researcher engagement in the subject under study and with the people that are active in that category. And it's more inductive than deductive, meaning that we're encouraging conversations between the participants as well as discussing things with them ourselves. So basically, you're going from the specific to the general rather than deductive, assuming, for example, that a marketing theory is correct, and we just need to document that. Rather, what we're doing here is keeping an open mind in the focus group. So we're allowing the respondents to lead us. And that would make it an iterative process where you're going to follow up with a question and follow up with a survey based on what you had learned earlier or what kinds of ideas are out there. Obviously, we're not going to make a significant business decision without testing to see if the people in a focus group in a particular area were there. So basically, there are criticisms such as Aspers and Quart, a good definition of qualitative research. Can you go back to that one? I think we just skipped up. Thank you, Crystal. Should emphasize its key strengths and features, not what it lacks. For example, not saying what it isn't, because that's giving you basically an indication. The fact that the textbooks that I use are written primarily by quantitative researchers, and their editors are saying, well, we need a couple chapters on qual, so can you get someone to do it, or can you do it? It's typically disintegrated with the rest of the book, and it doesn't really allow for that much connection. It's sort of standalone in these books. So it reveals the tendency among quantitative researchers to view it as a residual category for any kind of non-quant research, which is basically saying that when the term qualitative research is bandied about, it's generally being defined in terms of something tangible, such as quantitative research, which is something that's loosey-goosey, which is qualitative research, and it doesn't adhere to the scientific principles. So there's a bias built into these definitions. And I would really go back to the inductive and deductive, which is both are happening, but the goal is not to reach closure in a focus group, but to find out the diversity that's out there. Next slide, please, Crystal. Good. So here's one from Gil Churchill I taught at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he was the marketing research guru there for many years. In his textbook, 1991, I think was his last edition, the 5th edition, focus groups are another useful method for gathering ideas and insights. The moderator attempts to follow a rough outline of issues while simultaneously having the comments made by each person considered in group discussion. Each individual is thereby exposed to the ideas of others, and that's my underlining and italics, and submits his or her ideas to the group for consideration. So basically, the term that I put rough also in italics, rough outline. Rough outline means perhaps not as rigorous as a quantitative researcher like Gil Churchill would like. But this is a little more favorable than some of the others. Next slide, please. And the exposure to ideas of other people raises the issue of small group management. If the goal is actually to get a sense of the ideas that are out there about our brands or about our topic, that we're not trying to reach closure, but the thing that we want to do is contribute to that independence by, you can say, as most moderators say at the beginning of a session, there are no wrong answers. But then when somebody's perhaps being a little forceful about their opinion, maybe that sort of goes by the wayside, and it's hard sort of to dismiss that. One of the benefits of taking this online, doing the focus group online, is that people are separated as we are today. There's some 50 people out there, and Crystal and I are here. But if I say something that's outrageous, or someone has an outrageous comment, it's more manageable than if we're in the same room, basically. And we're looking for diversity, and that's diversity of experience. And so I would change what Churchill suggested. A flexible conversation guide is what we have, not a rough outline, as in Gil Churchill's textbook. It's not rough as opposed to fine-tuned. It's flexible in terms of allowing the responsibility to the people in the focus group, the participants, and not to be overly directive. And then the aggregation is the third part. And this comes from James Surowiecki. And let me just give you a little background on James Surowiecki. He was for many years, a opinion writer and financial writer for the New Yorker magazine. I read several of his articles 15 or 20 years ago. And based on his Wisdom of Crowds book, I invited him as the chair of a Market Research Association meeting to come tell us about his ideas of independence, diversity, and aggregation as a keynote speaker. At first, he didn't want to do it. He said, well, I don't know much about research, and I've never run a focus group. And I said, well, I think maybe we can work together and learn some of those things. I also happened to mention that we were meeting in Las Vegas, and that did it. He is very much interested in gambling and all those kinds of things in terms of ratios and so on. And he was a tremendous success as our keynote speaker then. So that's the background on Surowiecki. Again, he's not an expert in focus group management. He's talking about small groups, and he wants them to reach closure. We're not asking for that. That's a difference in terms of a non-standalone focus group, where really what we're looking for is the opportunity to take the possible leads and find out which ones have legs at the quantitative stage. And that's what I'm advocating today. Next slide, please.
Do we want to show our video at that point there, Lawrence?
Well, that one, the one that you have, oh yes, let's do that. Thank you for the reminder. We have a video from Richard Kruger, who's a old school. This is 20 years old before you started. This is a demonstration that's available to you on YouTube. But basically, he is, I think this is a standalone focus group that he's showing best practices for. There are certain things that happen, however, that are not currently best practices that we'll talk about after we show a little clip, but there should be about 75 seconds or so on. So hang with us. This is Richard Kruger, a focus group on airplane travel. And again, that indicates that it's a mock-up of it's not a real focus group because there's no branding going on here. It doesn't talk about Northwest Airlines at that time, which was the leading airline inside and out of the Twin Cities. He's was a University of Minnesota professor. Here we go.
One of the techniques moderators use is to have rapid ways of getting information from people. Through the use of fingers or thumbs or writing words on pieces of paper, you're able to quickly get information from people. Let's take a look at some examples. Okay, now what we'd like to do is I'm going to be announcing or giving the names of a number of inconveniences that people might have. And I'd like you to tell me how frequently you have experienced these in the last 2 years. We're going to use fingers on this. And so what I'd like to do is have you hold up your hands, not right now, but in just a moment when I call for those, and hold up to 5 fingers. If you hold up 5 fingers like this, that means that this happens almost every time. It happens very regularly, almost always. 4 fingers, it happens regularly, but not at every time. 3, about half the time it occurs. 2, it happens occasionally, and 1 finger means that rarely does this happen or never at all. And so I'll be naming one, like for example, the first one is lost luggage. Hold up your hands with how many fingers has this occurred to you in the last couple years? Okay, I see a 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1. Okay.
Thank you, Crystal. Did anybody notice anything that violated one of Surowiecki's key things to create independence, make people feel that they can make their own decisions? If you could just put in the chat anything you noticed that you think might have been problematic in what we just saw. And I'll take a look, but and just say nothing, it seemed great, that's fine. Okay. Forcing respondents into a quant scale. Laura, that's interesting. Yeah, he's using a Likert scale. And timing could influence each other. James Valke, excellent. Maybe I'll wait for 1 or 2 more. Okay, one person answered immediately. Yes, that was, I think, Marianne. I'm not sure. It's hard to read those placards. Let's go back and look at the last 5 or 10 seconds, if I can ask you to do that, Crystal. And I'll we're just going to go to the actual voting here.
Means
that's
that
good, right?
Rarely does this happen or never at all. And so I'll be naming one, like for example, the first one is lost luggage. Hold up your hands with how many fingers? Has this occurred to you in the last couple years?
Stop it.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, I think Marianne, and again, it's blurry. Actually, they write their names on both sides of the name tent, so that the camera can collect it and people can know the names of people around them. And one of the goals is to get them to talk to each other. But Rosemary, I believe, is the dark-haired woman, put up one finger, and there isn't anyone that goes, this is rarely. There are several issues with this. There are frequent flyers in the room, and there are people that fly occasionally, and lost luggage may be irrelevant to some of those that are able to take their luggage in with them, and so on and so forth. But yeah, the reason why he's doing this is typically, if this were a real focus group, there would be, in marketing research, there would be marketing people behind the one-way mirror who want to see what I call spectacle research. And that's one of the benefits of focus groups. And certainly another one would be to have it held in San Diego or Miami in the middle of winter, not Chicago. One of the benefits of doing a video conference focus group through iTracks is the lack of a necessity to actually travel, although some marketers want to get out of town and want to go to a warm place like Phoenix in the middle of winter. And you'll see that happens. And very few focus groups are staged in Chicago during the Windy City's colder days. But yeah, there's no reason to do this. And first of all, he's putting Quant inside a qualitative study, and that's okay. If he's going to write a report to the Association of Airlines or something like that with this behind him, but we don't know if an information cascade started or not. And that's my point here, that if you could put this down in paper, for example, and have people lock in, the only reason they're doing this to speed things up is because he's trying to stay within the hour and a half or 2 hours that people are being paid to be in the focus group, but also to keep the people behind the one-way mirror excited. And they themselves can see what the scoring is. So the acceleration is not in the best interests of getting people's personal opinions. And I'm using this as an example. If it were a discussion, we wouldn't be able to see it as clearly. So I'm using this as a model. Let me just check the chat. Holding up 3 fingers skews the response. In this particular case, Daleen, yes. We don't know what 3 fingers means. First of all, if you've had no experience, do you hold up 3 fingers? That it's neutral. And the goal within for most of market research, and many of you may already know this, preaching to the choir, but you collapse the top 2 boxes because the hardest Likert scale to respond to is one that is just yes, no. People will leave it blank because they don't know, or it depends on the situation. If you put a neutral in there, you get more responses. And if you go 5, you can go north or south of dunno or neutral. And those can be collapsed together. The only company I know that I've worked for that didn't do that was Basie's Booz Allen Sales Estimating System, which is now part of AC Nielsen. Last I saw, things move around. But there they did in terms of new product ideation, they would separate 1 finger from 2 fingers in this example. And weight them differently. And they'd also give some weight to probably would not purchase. in terms of how big to build the factory or what it looks like. So in the multi-method approach that I'm advocating for today, the role of the focus group changes from what Dick Kruger has going there. It's ideal for researchers unfamiliar with the brand or category. And this is what happened to me when I was hired at Wrigley when they got the candy category from gum. You may not know this, and this happened about 10 years ago. They got Skittles, Starburst, and Lifesaver gummies from Hackettstown from M&M Mars, and people that were interested in packaging and all sorts of things for gum now all of a sudden had to take on candy. So I learned along with them, and we did 15 focus groups. This was face-to-face because there were a lot of candies being handed out and lots of observations being made. And we actually did a one-off interview with in people's homes before their friends came in, and we found out all sorts of things by doing that. Didn't realize, for example, that young boys and girls do not want to eat candy together, and the advertising that they had lined up showed, a bunch of kids of different genders, races, and sizes, and so on, which didn't make sense to this group because the boys say that the girls are very, very picky about what they eat. They'll eat a Starburst in 4 bites rather than what the boys would do is put 2 or 3 in their mouth at the same time. Obviously, they need to unwrap them before they do that. And the girls thought that was disgusting, and the boys thought the girls were silly. And just an example of what came out of these focus groups that was confirmed in the Quant to follow. And so it basically it supports the Quant. The Qual is revealing questions or topics for confirmation in the Quant stage to follow that you wouldn't know to ask if you didn't do the qualitative research first. It just, so you would put a survey out there, but because there was basically an information cascade in what you did, now your survey is focused on something that's of lesser importance than something else. And it reveals the language and terminology appropriate for questionnaire usage. Working on an air freshener project, seeing if beyond the major franchise of a national brand of women, to see if they could get 21 to 29-year-old men into the category of the air freshener. And they used the term in our focus group of getting rid of the funky smell. And that's a term that my client and I hadn't heard. And turned out that was the term where women will use the air freshener as part of a general cleaning. The guys were working on their apartment or their room at home or their dorm room to get rid of the funky smell. It was the only cleaning they did, it seemed, as opposed to what women were doing. And the whole notion of doing a little dance after freshening up a room as a final statement after the bed is made and the vacuuming and the dusting and so on, that meant nothing to these guys. The only thing they did was the funky smell. And by the way, they didn't want a fragrant smell because that was telltale. And again, that was all confirmed in the Quant. And that's something that we wouldn't have known of if we had just gone straight to Quant. The word funky wouldn't have been there, and the need to know the male versus female differences in terms of these. Other things came out, such as not walking down the cleaning aisle that the guys typically didn't go there. So they had to put a secondary location up near the men's shaving things to be able to get some neutral flavors out there, or scents, I should say. And then it provides enhancement to the quant data in the final presentation. Basically, if you're sent, yeah, that's one of the comments that people made, which was that it's kind of a dry thing to do. Well, you can gussy up the quantitative data with a qualitative statement that comes out of the focus group. So you can actually put a face on it. So these are the ways that just to summarize, these are the ways that researchers can learn about the category. And we probably threw away the first or second focus group. And we were supposed to do 15 for Wrigley. We only did 13 because we were getting the same thing. We felt comfortable that we could move quickly to the quant phase. And then we did enhance the final presentation with quotations that put a face on what people were saying. Next slide, please, Crystal. And Crystal will have more to say is when she's demonstrating the iTrax service platform doing online focus groups. The synchronous online focus group allows for conversation and interaction. You need to work on that, I have to say, from my experience. Typically, when students are doing their own iTrax surveys, they are just going through the guide, the discussion guide, and putting them out there. Especially if we have a 75-minute class, that's the limit to how long our focus group can be. And so I've got 2.5-hour classes where there's much more probing going on. And we put a probing bank together so we can say things like, tell us more, or you said other, which one is it? Or why do you feel that way? Or did you notice what somebody else said? And Crystal will show you how you can force people to put their answer out there before they're able to see others and join the conversation, so that that information cascade that Sir Wecky talked about doesn't emerge. And the weakness, most people and most lists, if you look at focus group strengths and weaknesses on Wikipedia, you're going to see online text focus group fielding misses out on nonverbal behavior. Well, the video-based focus group option that Crystal's going to share with you takes care of that. I as a graduate student, was focused on things like proxemics and kinesics and how people communicate through space and through language and private space and those kinds of things. Edward T. Hall, the author of The Silent Language and the Hidden Dimension, was on my thesis committee. But I think it's overstated. I would say that I haven't seen much on nonverbal behavior in the summaries. Generally speaking, the video is delivered to the client after a focus group, and it just sits on a shelf. It's documentation, if the client wasn't there, that the focus group actually occurred. But as you can see from the Dick Kruger little clip that we showed you, that things can really help you understand. And in this case, challenge that should have been done on paper or somewhere where there was private balloting. Next slide. And that is it. Crystal, do you think we have time for questions now, or?
Yeah, sure. So as Larry alluded to, I'm going to show you a couple things as far as how we can apply what Professor Fisher spoke about in the iTracks platform. But while I get that set up, we do have a question that came in that says, "Hi, Lawrence. In the video, you showed an example of some techniques used for visual cues among your respondents. Do you have experience leveraging visual cues in a virtual or online setting? If so, are there any techniques that you recommend?"
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the virtual cues?
Yes, virtual cues. So in the video, we had people holding their hands up. It says, "Do you have experience leveraging visual cues in a virtual or online setting? And if so, are there any techniques you can recommend?"
Well, yes, and one example I have, going back to the Wrigley study, we went into a woman's, a 22-year-old woman's apartment, and talked to her for about an hour and a half before her friends showed up. But she told us ahead of time on candy that she saves her best for last. I see maybe that rings bells for some. It's sorting them, and people would just say, "Well, why M&Ms? They're all taste the same. Who cares if they're red, green, or yellow?" And we also found out somebody would hold up a fun pack and say, "What's fun about a fun pack? There are 4 flavors in here, and none is my favorite." That's a Halloween kind of a thing. But she told us she saves her best for last and told us what her favorite candies were and showed us how much she knew, not only about the flavors, not only about the colors, but about the flavors and so on and so forth. And then when they were passing candy around during the session, I happened to notice that she was taking her favorites. And I called her on it. I said, Susan or whatever, you said that you save your best for last, but now you've got a pile of your favorites in front of you. What's going on? And she said, "Oh, well, I was thinking about when I'm by myself. But if I let this bowl go around a couple more times, I'm not going to get any of the ones that I want." So basically the situation came in, but that's an example of looking at these cues and going back and sharing it with people from Wrigley that were not in on that particular focus group to see how important that is. The other thing that we would see is with the Starburst, when you're in junior high or something like that, and somebody it says, can I have a candy of yours? The problem is that if I turn the Starburst to you, you may take one of the red ones or one of the green ones or one of my favorites. So I'll open both ends. And if somebody asks me for one, I know I've got a green one I don't like, and I'll turn it over before I extend my hand. And my favorites are saved for me. And that's something again that we saw in the clips and so on. So yes, and maybe a final example might be when people were holding up things. Some of the younger boys, 12, 14 years old, could not open the packages themselves and would ask their mom to do it. And they had no fingernails. So it has something to do with eating the small little bite-sized pieces that went into greater research at Wrigley to figure out what was going on there. But we had, and these were only heavy users. These were not standard users. They had to take a screening survey and not only talk about eating candy 2 or 3 times a week, but also would have to know facts about their favorite candy. What are the flavors? What's the typical price for them, and those kinds of things. But before I forget, one of the cultural things is that you have to ask for candy. No one's going to say, "I've got candy today at school. Would you like some?" And again, the family pack is a joke. And it makes too much noise in class. They're going to get confiscated. All right, enough on that.
You've got me craving Starburst now, Lawrence. So I'm gonna go and
Yeah.
we do have another question. Before we get to it, I am just going to share my screen again and do what you had referenced earlier, which is show how some of what you talked about can be accomplished in the iTrax software. So I am hopefully sharing my screen now. Lawrence, can you tell me if you can see our text chat open here?
Yes.
Great. So if you're not familiar with iTrax software, what we're looking at in here is a text-based focus group that I have currently running for demonstration purposes. So there are a couple options when you want to do a synchronous focus group in the real-time software. That's what iTrax calls their synchronous software. iTrax real-time. You can do either a text-based focus group or you can do a video-based focus group. So it's just like it sounds, the text-based one, people aren't on video. They're going to be typing all of their answers. The video one, they are going to be on video. So you can see them, you can, read facial cues, social or, physical cues, all of that. But in both of those instances, you're going to have what you can see over here on this side of my screen, which is your discussion guide. And here's where we're going to implement some of that prevention of that group bias or that information cascade that Lawrence talked about, where people are influencing each other's responses. So I'll demonstrate it first in the text-based focus group. So again, this is my discussion guide. Now, this is something that you can access well in advance of the group to build out before you start your group. You can load questions into here. You can load your media. You can load little like script prompts for yourself as the moderator. I'm in the moderator's view right now, so I can see it, but none of your participants are going to be able to see this. So that's really just for you as the person who is running the group. But you can also work with it during the group. So it's very, very agile. If you want to be adding questions or everything after the group has already started, you can absolutely do that. So even though my group has already started with me and then 2 fake participants who are also me, because we're demonstrating in a webinar here, I can still add questions. So I'm going to do that right now. I'll add a question. We're going to do an open text question, which is like what we have here. And we'll do one that's exactly like this one I've already posted. So we'll say, what is your favorite streaming service? And the key part here is that we're going to make this question uninfluenced. So what that means is if I had left this unchecked, it's just going to go, what's your favorite streaming service? Save it, whatever. And then as I post that, everyone can answer and everyone can see each other's answers showing up in real time. But if I want it to be uninfluenced, which I do because I want to prevent that information cascade, it's going to mean that nobody, like the participants, can't see the other participants' responses until they themselves have responded. So it's forcing that independence and it's forcing someone to come up with their own idea before they see what everyone else picked. So like in that video where we saw Marianne hold up her 1 and then everyone kind of looked around and held up within that 1 or 2 range because they maybe didn't want to deviate so far, you're not going to get that effect. So here I have already posted this same kind of question that I had. It was uninfluenced here. What's your favorite streaming service? We can see Melody has answered Netflix, but I can see here, because I'm the moderator, that the following participants have not yet responded to the current question. Ginny's our other participant, and she hasn't responded to this yet. Now, if we go over to this other window where I'm Ginny, I can see that the moderator has asked the question. I can't see that Melody, the other participant that I'm in here with, has answered it yet, even though she has. And the reason for that is because I, Ginny now, haven't yet answered that question. And our moderator wants me to come up with my own response without being influenced, because maybe I'm going to think like, oh, Melody likes Netflix. I want to say I like Netflix too, because that seems like the popular response in here. So instead, because I'm thinking individually, I'm going to say, oh, my favorite streaming service is Disney Plus. And then as soon as I press enter, all of a sudden Melody's response pops up. So the software was hiding that response for me because I hadn't answered yet, but now it realizes that I have responded to that. I've said Disney Plus. So it's going to show me what the other participants have stated as well, so that we can then have a discussion around that. and talk about why we all chose what we chose. So that's how it works in a text group with open-ended text responses. You can also do it for polling questions where you give people sort of multiple choice that they can pick. And for that one, I'll show you what that looks like in a video group. So this is what it would look like if you, instead of running a text-based focus group, we're running a video-based focus group. Now this one, there's no participants in here, it's just me, but if there were, they would show up in here, or you can go, as soon as the group starts, it's gonna go full screen so that you can really focus. But I still have my guide here, and I can still use it to add questions and all that kind of thing. It's still hidden from all of our participants, but you can see here that I have a polling type question, and that, again, I have the ability to make it uninfluenced. So what that means is when I'm in my group and I'm launching my poll, it's not going to show the other participants what responses have, how many answers and everything until they themselves have responded. So same kind of idea. We don't want people influenced there. We want them making decisions independently. The other checkbox that I have checked here is also to sort of minimize as much bias as I can get. And that's that I have the responses randomized. So in this case, we don't want any kind of order bias happening. We don't want to be like, oh, did people pick Netflix because they all really like Netflix? Or did they pick it just because it was the first one that showed up for them and they didn't even make it all the way down the list? They just wanted to answer the question. When I make it randomized, it's going to vary the order that it shows people these choices. So for Crystal, it shows Netflix first, maybe for for Ginny, it shows Netflix first, for Melody, maybe it shows Amazon Prime first, so that we're not getting that order bias, and we can be confident that each choice there was equally represented, and hopefully be confident that people were coming up with their answers because that is genuinely how they feel, not because they were biased in any sort of way by how things were showing up or what their fellow participants were answering. So with that, and again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll move on to the next question for Lawrence, and is from Stephanie in Nairobi, Kenya. So thank you for joining us. It must be really, really late there. So they say, thank you for this presentation. What comes first in a mixed study, qual or quant? And what is the risk if the reverse happens? So I'll put this one to you, Professor Fisher.
Oh, okay. I am of the school of qual first, then quant. It really depends on how knowledgeable you are in the category, you yourself as a researcher. If you're, in my Wrigley example, nobody from Hackettstown came over with the candy, and Wrigley was marketers were just saying, well, it's the same. When you realize, no, a 20-pack of gum can last 2 or 3 weeks in somebody's purse, but candy, generally, boys will be eating, just taking it in, gulping it down, and the wrapper goes in the garbage can right outside the 7-Eleven. So there are very differences there. So I'm saying qual first, but ideally, if you had time, you'd do qual, then quant, and then if other questions came up, you'd go back to qual. But it depends on your budget, your time, and your money. If a decision needs to be made, you don't have that flexibility. I spent 3 years in the West Indies doing my ethnographic research, and I had ethnography, which is observation, people building barbecues and those kinds of things with briquettes. That can be done in an hour. And yet I was taking years. And that was another luxury you have in academia that you don't have in the business world. But yeah, qual is informing the quant. The quant I see as sort of insurance that you want to make sure you're right, and that an information cascade hasn't occurred, and you've got a false consensus, which is a problem. So that in that regard, if you submit the quantitative, typically in my experience, you submit the quantitative data to the decision makers at your client, And if you're in a marketing research department, then you go over to marketing, and then it goes on up from there. But it's based on numbers. And if you can make it, you can make your point stronger. You're telling a better story with commentary that comes from them. That works too.
Great, thank you. We'll go kind of back and forth here. So I see some discussion happening in the chat around leveraging the video recordings of the focus group. And my colleague Leon, thanks Leon for sort of helping out in the chat here, was referencing some of the features available in reports. So I'm just going to share my screen again. And this time I have my screen open to a reports page or a totally different project. So this is a project that's already been completed so that I'm able to see the reports. This is something that another sometimes collaborator of ours, Chad Bowie, worked on, and it was a big focus group with voters, and it was politically based. So there's a few things that I wanted to show you in here. So there was some talk in the chat going on about individual video feeds, and this is something also that Lawrence talked about as far as like putting a face to certain statements and things. You'll see here that in our reports, we have a whole bunch of different videos available. Now, this was just one focus group. The reason that we have so many videos is because we have single stream videos available for every single one of our participants. So we have these 6 participants plus our moderator, Chad, in here, and they each have their own individual video that's going to show up in full screen that is just them. So if we wanted to do something like a highlight reel, or we wanted to include in a report somebody saying something, we can have their single stream video that's just them, so that we can have, you know, their whole face showing, and make sure that, you know, it's high quality that way. We also have the group recording, and here there is something new available that's super cool that I also saw being mentioned in the chat, which is the new video indexer. So this is something that is available right now to annual subscribers of Real Time for free for a limited time, and it's in beta. So if you haven't heard about it yet, that's why it's going to be rolling out for everybody in Q2. But right now it's in beta, and it's available for free for all of our annual subscribers. And this has a whole bunch of cool analysis tools available. So this is our video indexer tool here. And I'll just mute it so that we don't have competing audio. But here you're going to have other tools like it's going to use AI to identify different topics that were talked about. So this particular group was about politics. So you can see there's a lot of politics stuff in there. It's going to identify named entities. So here we have like all of the different people. If I wanted to see, okay, where did we talk about Mitch McConnell? I can click on Mitch McConnell and I can jump straight to that part of the video, and it's going to take me directly to where we talked about that, or where we talked about, you know, for example, Nancy Pelosi, and it'll automatically go to those parts of the video. It's also going to identify different emotions for me. So there are different parts in this video where the AI has noted that there was some anger going on, or some joy, or some sadness. So we can see the proportions. This one, unfortunately, there was more anger identified, and I think, you know, with political conversations, I guess that's maybe why they say avoid them at dinner, is because you often have that going on. So you'll see that reflected in the analysis here. Also available in this indexer tool are a whole bunch of features related to what it calls the timeline, but is the transcript. So here you have your automatically generated transcript. Let's turn on all of these features, and then you can see that it is going to highlight keywords for us. It's going to name the speakers and identify them. We can go ahead and we can change the speaker names if we want. So if we wanted to remember that, you know, speaker number 1 was our moderator, we'll go ahead and we'll rename him that. Here, do that. And then it's going to call him that all the way throughout. Oh, no. You can also edit inline. So that's what I've done here, is I've just edited a whole transcript by accident, but you can undo that. You can also, and this is super useful. You can translate your whole transcript to any of these languages listed here. There's a whole bunch of them. So this is your automatically generated transcript, and you can go, if I want to translate it to Bulgarian, that's what I've just done here. I'm in Canada, so maybe we want to translate this to French Canadian. We can go ahead and we can do that. And then this is something that you can then download and send to maybe some collaborators you have that speak different languages. So lots of cool features available in here. Now we are at 1 p.m., but we have one last question that I want to send to Lawrence over here. So we will be sending out this recording. So if you have to take off, then don't worry. We will send out the recording, and any questions that are left here that come in after the fact, we can answer them one-on-one via email because we have your information. But someone here, Lawrence, has asked, with regard to setting up the context of the group for participants, in your experience, is it better to directly tell participants the point of the group and who is sponsoring it? Or is it better to keep them guessing about who's sponsoring the group? Or are there rationales for both? And what would those scenarios be?
Wow, that's a good question. It really depends. The answer really depends um, uh, on your circumstances. I mean, the ideal way is, if, for example, if you using Crystal's streaming video, streaming media example, do you want to say that it's streaming video or streaming audio? Do you want to say that it's sponsored by Netflix? If you're introducing a bias if you do that. I could show you in the beginning of the Kruger interview. He says that you are, if anybody wants a transcript of this focus group, just let me know. We'll take your names afterwards. That's not possible when it's sponsored research, and so that's sort of an empty offer, as I would say, basically that he can't really do that. It's not his to share. Especially if it's branded stuff. But I would just, in terms of that example that Crystal had, I would invite them to talk about, things I do for entertainment in my spare time at home. But we're really interested, Netflix is interested, but once you've said that it's about streaming video or it's about Netflix, you've lost the ability to go back up. You start at 30,000 feet and then go down into the specifics. And the last thing that I do is ask for demographics. And that's because you invited them to take a survey about entertainment at home, but now you want to know how old I am and what my household income is, or those kinds of things. That's kind of a put off at the beginning, but you can save for those purposes. So the answer is be as vague as you can, so that you're not giving the name of the sponsor. I'd say 99% of the things that I work on are branded, and they're not, the category comes in, but it's only to see how our brand is doing within the category. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. And I see in the chat we have Dr. Janet Salmons in there too, another beloved collaborator of ours who has shared some good resources. So be sure to check those out. So we are out of time. Thank you very much, Professor Fisher, for that really, really valuable information. I hope that everyone enjoyed it. Thank you again to everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your day.